Okay, so today we have two games, Cyberspin for the Super Nintendo and F1 Circus 91 for the PC Engine, which the PC Engine over here was the TurboGrafx 16. Both games are incredibly similar, and I'll show you why in this review. We're going to start with Cyberspin, which I believe is the more approachable of the two games, and it also has the advantage that it came out domestically in the United States. Cyberspin starts with what sounds like a game show theme, but don't be fooled, this game overseas was based on Cyber Formula, an anime series about futuristic racers. Of course, when it came out here, they removed all references to said series. I believe the Japanese version even had cutscenes between races. Well, you get none of that here. All you get with this one is hyper-fast, ball-to-the-wall, blink and you're dead racing. And that's not such a bad thing, is it? Starting the game throws you right into the qualifying round where you have to complete at least one of 3 laps under a given time. And the time limit it gives is actually quite strict. You have to take all the corners well and use turbo wisely. It's often not good enough to just not crash. And how well you do here determines your position in the starting grid. You can feel the tension as the race starts. In fact, every moment of Cyberspin is really tense, and it demands the kind of concentration I usually associate with arcade shoot-'em-up games or something like that. Every second of the race, you'll be watching for other cars, trying to figure out when it's safe to turbo right past them, working the throttle, and keeping an eye out for quick turns that'll throw your car into the fence. Now, fortunately, an icon appears at the top of the screen to warn you when a turn is coming up, and the game engine is only capable of so many variants of turns. So when you see that icon go on, you have to figure out what kind of turn is coming up and respond accordingly. So although there is memorization, the game is actually kind of a twitch racing game. One nice game design decision too is that even though I'm in the lead, the game still throws cars at me to avoid, so there's always that chance of getting derailed, crashing, getting thrown back. Cyberspin knows how to keep things tense. Now, Cyberspin is not without its share of issues. For one, the way they make use of turbo on the qualifying laps really bugs me. So, you get turbo, but you don't get refills. And there are 3 laps for qualifying. The upshot of that is that you don't have enough turbo to do all 3 laps well. Now, the first lap, granted, is supposed to be a warm-up practice lap where you kind of figure out the course. But that means that the second lap has to be practice too, because there's only really enough turbo to go all out on the 3rd lap in many of these courses. Now, that's not a big deal if you manage to qualify on your first try. But if you fail, it quickly grows tedious. It would have been nice if they'd given you enough juice so that at least 2 of your laps could be serious contenders. What can be really annoying as well is how strict the time limit is on some of these courses. In this run shown here, I did not crash in my best lap. I turboed every chance I could get, and yet I still did not manage to qualify, falling less than a second behind the minimum required. That's roughly 4.5 minutes of qualifying gameplay, 2/3 of which could not be serious contenders. Very frustrating. Fortunately, the game has a password save, so even though each race is not trivial to pass, your progress isn't lost. So that's Cyberspin, an ultra-fast, top-view racing game, and while its style is certainly uncommon, It's not one of a kind, and I'll show you why in just a second when we switch to F1 Circus on the PC Engine. Here's F1 Circus on the PC Engine. It's eerily similar to Cyberspin, albeit a little bit less futuristic, and in some ways a little bit more detailed. When you start the game, you are asked to enter your name and pick a team. And I love these copyright skirting team names they give you. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go for the Lotas team. And I'm in free run mode where you can pick any course you want to race instead of doing a whole season. I believe the import edition of Cyberspin has that, but they took it out for the US release. Like in Cyberspin, you first have to qualify before you race. First, you can tell that this game has a little bit more going on than Cyberspin did, for better or for worse. First off, it has a gear shift, though I'm using automatic transmission, and it also has the health of different parts of your car like suspension, tire, wings, and brakes, which can, break. Cyberspin only had one power gauge, which gets shared between your turbo and the damage your car takes. This game does not have turbo, it just has other things to worry about. And speaking of added complexity, the game has some other options. Between races or between qualifying and racing, you can modify your car. And you can even change things like turning speed, which is great because, you know, you don't get an analog controller on the PC Engine or on the Super Nintendo, so. You know, I don't think there's any flourish in Cyberspin that wasn't ripped off from F1 Circus. Now, I don't know if they licensed some stuff from this or not. I did not find any of the staff in common when I Googled, but this game looks a lot like F1 Circus, down to the little flourishes. I mean, it scrolls backwards before a race starts to show you all the cars. The exhaust effects are similar. The way the counter is shown and stopped during qualifying is very similar. The location of the indicators are all in the same places. And we've got a red flag, which means some horrible crash happened and we have to restart the race. So let's try that again, and I'll try to run into people less this time. I love the engine sound in this game. Now, when I talked about Cyberspin, I said that it didn't really need all that much memorization. Well, I think F1 Circus actually needs a bit more. It's a little bit more involved, and it's due in part to the fact that the warning signs are less detailed. One other thing that I like more in Cyberspin is the difficulty curve. The curve in F1 Circus, if you're playing the championship, is a little bit less even, with the first course actually being a lot harder than this second course seen here, in part because you can't really stray off the road in the first course. Cyberspin also runs a little bit smoother than F1 Circus, and it has parallax, which is kind of cool. So I feel like Cyberspin is the more approachable of the two games, though I personally prefer F1 Circus more. And one good thing about F1 Circus as well is that it's available on systems other than the Super Nintendo and PC Engine. You know, there's a Genesis version, there's a NES version, I think there's a PC Engine CD version that's, you know, region free, of course. So there are more ways to play F1 Circus than there are to play Cyberspin. Of course, if you do have a Super Nintendo, Cyberspin is pretty plentiful, it's not very expensive, and it's the only game that's really like this that got released in the United States, to my knowledge. You know, I'm obviously not counting things like Micro Machines or RC Pro-Am. You know, those are different beasts. You know, they are multi-scrolling and considerably slower. and I've managed to wreck my car after the first lap. So there you go. If you want a racing game that's insanely demanding, you can't really go wrong with either of these games. They both offer their shares of fun and frustration and can be had without breaking the bank. Okay, well, thanks for joining me for Cool and Unusual Reviews. This month I'm doing all Nintendo reviews and other systems when I can sneak them in. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.